Hey, it's Kyla. Today we're ranting about my obnoxious neighbor. So I've lived in the same house my entire life, which means that I've lived across the street from this neighbor my entire life. Ironically, when I was younger, this neighbor's house was one of my favorite places in the entire world. I would always run across the street and go turn up in his yard. But then things changed. The one thing about this neighbor that I want to point out is that he is married somehow. And his wife is the sweetest person I've ever met. She has no problems with me or my family. She's just generous and friendly and the total opposite of her obnoxious husband. I don't know what she saw in him. I don't know why they got married. I don't know. I don't understand. But I have a few particular stories from back in the day up to now that I want to talk about. So the first thing I want to talk about is this neighbor's history of fat shaming my family. Now, I'm not skinny. My family's not skinny. It's just a thing that is. And this neighbor seems to think that that's his business. Whenever my family would come home with bags of takeout food, this neighbor would approach us and say things like, "You don't need to eat that," or "When are you guys gonna lose weight?" or, "You know, you guys are too young to have health problems," and just all this stuff that was not his business. And it got to the point where my family could not bring food home without fear of being judged by this neighbor. It didn't stop us from bringing food home, but it definitely put a damper on the experience. Sometimes I would come home with food and I would try to hide it, or other times I'd be like, "I don't care, let me flash it in his freaking face." A couple of years ago, I lost a lot of weight, and this neighbor took notice, except he took notice in all the wrong ways. He would call me skinny as if it were my name. And keep in mind that me and this neighbor are not very close. We're not on really friendly terms. But I would be walking to my car to drive to school, and he'd be like, "Hey, how's it going, skinny?" And maybe that's not something to be offended about, but I just really didn't like it. Another thing about this neighbor, like I said, the relationship that I have with this neighbor now is a lot different than it was when I was younger, and kind of my entire family's relationship with this neighbor has kind of just gone downhill because my family's tolerance for this neighbor has kind of finally snapped. Mine snapped a long time ago, but theirs finally snapped. We used to have an issue where we would go out, and if he saw us walking to our car, he would come up to us and he would talk to us. Normal, not a problem, except he would talk forever. Like, you got stuck talking to him for at least a half hour. Once he was talking to you, there was no getting away. And maybe you're thinking, "Kyla, he's just friendly." No. Because when he talked to you, he liked to brag about things. He liked to comment on things that you were doing wrong that he was doing right. Or he was just trying to tell you how to live your life the right way. They were not friendly how do you do conversations. Or he was ranting about other neighbors in the neighborhood that he didn't like for this reason or that reason, reasons that were not really good reasons. And yeah, they were just not conversations you wanted to get stuck in. Another thing is he liked to tell my family how to take care of our yard and our house and our car. Giving friendly neighborly tips is fine, but he has such a condescending attitude. He wouldn't say things like, oh, you know, you want me to mow your lawn for you or something? He would be like, you know, your lawn is kind of messing up the whole neighborhood's look. He would say stuff like that. Our lawn, because the grass got a little high, not ridiculous, just a little high, because we didn't get around to it, was messing up the entire neighborhood, and the neighborhood wasn't gonna sell houses because our lawn was a little long. Or he would tell my dad, you didn't trim the hedges the right way, you didn't do this the right way. He also tried to kick me out of my house when I was a teenager. Now, he has no power over whether or not I live in my house, but he speaks without knowing anything, because when I was still in high school, he was like, oh, she should be out living on her own by now. What? Like, I haven't even graduated yet. I haven't even walked the stage. I don't have my diploma. Like, and he'd be like, oh, well, I was moved out of the house when I was 16, and I had a job, and I had my own place, and I was doing great. Times have changed since then. Even back then, kids didn't have to be moved out by 18 or 16 or whatever. The economy is really screwed up, and it's a lot more difficult for my generation to do things than it was for his. But he would go and he would tell my parents that I shouldn't live there anymore. I'm 21 and I still live here. And I go to college, I have a job, but I still live here. But I shouldn't be, apparently. Because I guess I should have my own place, go to an expensive university, and pay for all of that with my restaurant job. But he talks as if he lived the perfect life, and anyone who doesn't live life the way that he does or did is wrong and is a freeloader. Yeah. Now, I want to talk about two specific events that have happened that I think are absolutely ridiculous. So the first one happened a few months ago. These are both recent events. Now, I want to start off by saying that I'm not 100% sure that this event was him, but it was one of my neighbors. And I'm pretty sure that it was him just based off of facts. It was either him or another neighbor. I know it was one of these two. But for the sake of this video, we're just gonna assume that it was him. But just keep in mind that there's a possibility it might not have been. So sometimes when I have a lot of stuff to carry into the house, or I'm leaving again soon, I park my car in front of the house on the street. Legally parked, you know, like in front of the sidewalk. And like I have a driveway, but sometimes it's just easier because my driveway is on the side of my house. And it's just easier sometimes to park in front so I can go straight to the front door. So one day, I never got around to putting my car back in my driveway, and I went to bed. I woke up at 6 a.m. to knocking at my front door. I looked at my phone to see what time it was and saw that it was 6. My dad works nights. He comes home around 7:30 in the morning. So I knew it wasn't him because it wasn't time for him to come home yet. I look over at the door and I see an unfamiliar face. My door has a little window in it. An unfamiliar face. I was sleeping on the couch. So I'm terrified that someone is knocking on my door at 6 in the morning that I don't recognize. So I get up, I walk over to the door, and I open it, which was kind of stupid of me. I didn't ask who it was. I don't know. I open the door and I see that it's the police. My first thought is that something happened to my dad. Because like I said, he was out at work. And I'm expecting, like, your dad is dead or something. And my heart sank. This was one of the most horrifying, scariest, English. One of the scariest and most horrifying incidents of my life. And then they say, "Is that your car over there?" And I said, "Yeah." I'm like half asleep. And he's like, "Well, we had a complaint that your car is blocking traffic, and since it's technically more than a foot away from the curb, you can either go move it or I can give you a ticket." This cop sounded annoyed with the situation. He sounded like he didn't want to be standing at my door at 6 a.m. and he was only doing it because of the technicalities and because somebody complained and he had to do it. But he seemed to think that it was just as ridiculous as I thought it was. So obviously I'm gonna pick moving my car over getting a ticket, so my sleepy butt walks out the door, gets in my car, and drives it, and there's 2 cops and they're watching me do this, and I'm like half asleep but also terrified. So I move my car and they're like, "Thank you," and then they leave. And I was having a panic attack over the whole thing, and I was barely able to get back to sleep after that. Now, I never found out who called the cops over my car and why they called so early. If I had to guess, I would say that they called even earlier than that, but the cops weren't gonna bang on my door before 6 a.m. They probably called at like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure it was probably him, because he's always threatening to call the cops on people. So, instead of just telling me himself that the car was in the way, or just dealing with it until I moved it in the morning, because it wasn't even that far in the road. It was a little bit far in the road, but it wasn't like totally blocking traffic. It was kind of a bad parking job. I'm not the best parker, but anyway, that happened. He would have rather called the police on me and had me get a ticket. I'm sure he wanted me to get a ticket. He's petty like that. Anyway, next story. So like I mentioned before, I actually have 2 neighbors that are not great, but the one that we're talking about is definitely way worse than the other one. But these 2 neighbors live right next to each other. So the other one, we're gonna call her Mary. And we're gonna call my neighbor who this whole video is about Jerry. Those aren't their names, but you know. So we have Mary and Jerry. Okay. They live right next to each other, right across the street from me. So Jerry has a fence, you know, dividing his house from Mary's, naturally. But I guess when you build a fence, at least around here, I don't know if this stands for everywhere, but here you cannot put your fence directly on the property line. It has to be like so many feet away from it on your property. So you technically have a piece of your property on the other person's side of the fence, if that makes sense. So Mary decided that she wanted to plant some vegetables and plants. I don't really know what all she has there. All I know is that she has a tomato plant and some other stuff. But I know about the tomato plant because it's very important in this story. So Mary plants some plants. And Jerry did not like that because these plants were planted right against the fence on what was technically his property. And the only reason that I know about this is because Jerry is very vocal about his feelings, and he told my parents, who he is still kind of talking to. He's not talking to me anymore. I stopped saying hi to him. I stopped acknowledging him when I walked by, which you might say is rude, but if you have dealt with the things from this guy that I dealt with, you would not want to say hello either. I'm sorry, but I can't just say, hey, how's it going, to somebody who's treated me and my family so badly. And he's made comments to my family about me being rude and, oh, you can say hi. And he said that directly to me, oh, you can say hi. And when he says that, I'm like, hi. And when my parents say, oh, Kyla, Jerry said this, and, you know, you can be a little more friendly to him, I'm like, I could, but I'm not. So I don't acknowledge Jerry anymore, but he still kind of talks to my parents, but not to the same extent that he did before, because my parents have kind of got fed up with it too. Anyway. But Jerry did tell my parents about this. Oh, blah blah blah, Mary is planting plants against the fence, which is on her side, but it's technically mine, that small strip of land that I'm paying for, even though it's on her side of the fence, yada yada yada. A normal person would just let it go. Like, okay, technically you're paying for that small strip of land, but it's still on the other person's side of the fence. Nobody that passes your property is gonna know that that is your property. Okay. And I learned afterwards that one of his issues with the plants is that, I guess, when it rains, because the property's kind of on a slant, it makes mud, like, go onto his property. So, I mean, I guess, but today, this happened today. My parents told me about this. They were talking to Jerry today, and he said to them, oh, if you guys want some tomatoes, you can just walk right onto my property and grab them, because I'm going to be having some free tomatoes pretty soon. And you know what he was talking about? Mary's tomatoes. Mary's tomatoes that she planted against the fence. He literally invited my parents, now don't worry, my parents are not going to do this, but he literally invited my parents to go pick Mary's tomatoes when they ripen, because they're on his property, and he thinks that that makes them his. And I'm kind of expecting him to just go steal her tomatoes when they ripen. That's ridiculous. Just because they're on that tiny strip of land that's yours, only because you can't put the fence exactly on the property line. I will keep you updated, but if he literally walks onto her property and starts taking her tomatoes because he thinks that they're his, because they're there, I want to move immediately. Like, I wanted to move immediately 10 years ago, but I can't. So this video is super long. I could go on about this neighbor forever, but maybe I'll make another video. But that's all I have to say about this. Whenever I tell my parents that I want to move, They say, oh, but you could get stuck with a worse neighbor. I really don't think that that's possible. I really don't. And if it is, the chances of that happening are slim. I really don't think that I would get stuck with another Jerry. Some of you watching this know Jerry, and you know, that's not his name, but you know exactly who I'm talking about. And you know, you've had experiences with Jerry. You know. If you visited me, if your extended family, yeah, even extended family has had issues with Jerry. I'm so sorry. I can't wait to move. Okay, thanks for watching. Let me know what you want to see next. Let me know if you have any similar stories. I will see you